Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm going to give the same sermon this morning that I gave last night because it was about such an important event that rocked the Jewish community in America this week. So I apologize to the 5 or 6 of you that are both Friday night and Saturday morning goers. I won't make a habit of this. When I was a little girl, the administration of the school changed our lunchroom policies. They said we could no longer sit with our friends, but rather we had to sit only with our class, and I was outraged. I came home, I was telling my parents about it, and they said, well, you know, this is a democracy, and there's something called a petition. So I collected over 100 signatures. I think I was 8 or 9. And I presented it to the principal, who promptly ignored me. My parents insisted that he at least meet with me, and he told me that no, he wasn't going to change the lunchroom policies. And I thought that he was a complete foo-foo head and that democracy had been thwarted. And I have to say, since that time, about 30 years have passed, and I do have a more sophisticated understanding of the political system. I want to share something that I was wrestling with this week. And in order to do that, I'll need to touch on politics. So I want to be very clear. I am not telling anyone who or what to vote for. I know that our community represents a number of political views, and I honor that and I appreciate that. I learn from it. I also know there are people who are uncomfortable with speaking about politics in the sanctuary. The point of the sermon is not politics, but rather Jewish values, and the context in which my experience happened was political. I'll also add that if you really want to test the mettle of a Jewish value, it doesn't happen in the sanctuary or the classroom. It happens out in the everyday world, of which politics is a part. And finally, for anyone who's feeling anxious that I'm about to bash AIPAC, that's not what I'm going to do this morning. The theme of my sermon today is myopia, nearsightedness, the inability to take in the whole picture because one is fixated on a detail. And I discovered this week that an important Jewish organization and I have myopia. So here's what happened. Last Friday, AIPAC announced that it was going to have Donald Trump speak at Policy Conference. For those that don't know, AIPAC is a large, powerful political organization that has one very simple mission: good relationship between the U.S. and Israel, primarily for the purpose of keeping Israel safe and secure. And Policy Conference is their largest annual event. I went through many reactions last week because, to be fair to AIPAC, they have a long-standing precedent of inviting all viable presidential candidates to Policy Conference, and they are a bipartisan organization who has to work with everybody in order to achieve their mission. So first, I withdrew from a wonderful opportunity I had been offered to travel with AIPAC to Israel this summer. Then, in the middle of the night, I wrote a scathing op-ed. And then in the morning, I wrote a more well-balanced op-ed. I checked on social media with my rabbinic colleagues to ask them, what are you going to do? And I thought about a petition to AIPAC, gathering signatures of rabbis. But on Monday morning, I spoke to 3 individuals who work for AIPAC. And I want to take a moment to say what fine people AIPAC has working for it. They were immediate in their response, they were respectful, and they were thoughtful in our conversation. And I am sure that on the Monday morning, after making such an announcement, there were many more people that they needed to speak to that day who had political clout, dollars to donate, but they took time with me. What I wanted to tell AIPAC's leadership is, you're being myopic. You are so focused on your goal of protecting Israel that you're willing to do business with anyone? And I want to clarify too, my objection to Trump is not his politics, but my experience of Trump is that he is a bigot and he incites violence. And my point to AIPAC was you can't be so focused on the mission of keeping Israel secure that you would ignore those things. The cost is too high if you're going to do business with Trump. But the most surprising part of the conversation was the response to me that I was being myopic. They questioned me, would you walk away from an entire organization that is doing this important work over one incident? And that was a very painful question for them to raise to me because I think you know I highly value pluralism. So it's given me food for thought, and I want to take a moment and acknowledge the Jewish tradition of tochacha, holy rebuke. It's what one person does for another when they think they've gone morally astray. It was important to me to hear that message presented respectfully by the employees of AIPAC because it really gave me food for thought. Myopia is a theme in this week's Haftorah. King Saul cannot see the big picture. So here's a summary of what happened in the Haftorah. God tells King Saul to annihilate the Amalekite nation. Now, before I continue, I want to acknowledge that this is a horrific story of genocide. I think that's something that we can and should talk about during Kiddush, but I want to focus on a different aspect of the story in my sermon today. So God tells King Saul, wipe out the Amalekites completely, even their animals. The reason being that the Amalekites are the descendants of Amalek, who attacked Israel in their most vulnerable moment when they first left Egypt. King Saul does not obey God's command. He spares some of the most choice animals to be used in sacrifice to God later, and he lets the king, King Agag, go. So God is very angry, and he tells the prophet Samuel to go and tell King Saul that he has lost the kingship over this. And Saul apologizes, but nonetheless the kingship is taken away, and the Haftorah ends with the prophet Samuel slaying King Agag, finishing the job. So this myopia of Saul's hinges perhaps on one word in verse 3, the hecheramtem. Hecheramtem is a word that has many meanings, and Saul understood it one way and perhaps God meant it another. It comes from the Hebrew root het resh mem. For example, if someone is in cherem, they have been exiled. It means to set aside in this context. What God meant with this command is, I want you to set aside everything of the Amalekite nation by killing it, by destroying it. And Saul tries to understand the words differently. He tries to spare the animals because maybe God means set aside these things for sacrifice to me, but don't enjoy them yourself. Don't take them as booty. But even if that were true, even if it was a misunderstanding, God goes on to say, V'al tachmol alav, have no mercy on it, meaning the Amalekite nation. And that's pretty clear. The Malbim, a 19th century Russian commentator, explains God picked the word that was the most unequivocal way of saying, do not let any of them go, despite your human impulse to give mercy to them. It is not a good idea, and I'm commanding you not to. So what is the big picture that Saul was missing in his impulse to have mercy? You have to turn to the Midrash to understand it. The rabbis see King Agag as the ancestor of Haman, the villain in our Purim story. That, by the way, is why we read this Haftorah, the Shabbat before Purim. In the one night that King Agag had between Saul sparing his life and Samuel slaughtering him, he impregnated a woman, and the descendant of that night became Haman. And Haman went on to be a threat to the Jewish nation, the entire Jewish nation during the period of the Persian Empire. So when Saul got fixated on the detail, he missed the bigger picture of what he had done. And had Saul made a different decision, perhaps the Jewish people would not have experienced a threat in the future. If we apply the lesson of this Haftorah to the story of me and AIPAC, who let Agag slip through their fingers to pose a threat Jewish people in the future? Was it AIPAC, by affiliating the Jewish people, Israel, and AIPAC with a man like Trump? Or was it me, who became so focused on the one issue of preventing using AIPAC's podium to spew hatred, that I would forego the mission of security that Israel needs? The answer to that question, I believe, is yes. Look, I have a role as a rabbi to be the prophetic voice that says, we shun such bigotry. And AIPAC has a role as a political agency to make sure that they move the chessboard around to secure Israel's future as best that they can. This tension that plays out between the prophet and the king is cyclical in the Bible. It's what we saw playing out between King Saul and the prophet Samuel in our Haftorah this week, and it's what we're seeing play out between AIPAC and a large number of rabbis this week. I would love to stand here and tell you sanctimoniously that I am the voice of the prophet delivering the message of God and AIPAC is the befuddled king, but I think I'd better look at the Bible and get some wisdom before I do that. First of all, the prophet and the king are both sanctioned by God. God appoints a prophet when God starts speaking to the prophet, and God also helps appoint the king. Here's how that comes to be. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 8. So Samuel has been the prophet of the people, but he's grown old and he's turned that office over to his sons. Unfortunately, his children are corrupt. So the people come to Samuel and they say, please, what we really need is a king to bring order to this chaos. Please go ask God if we can anoint a king. Samuel prays, God answers that he should go and anoint King Saul. And so, while the desire for a king came from the people, the king is a position that is sanctioned by the prophet and God. Furthermore, before there was a monarchy in ancient Israel, there was anarchy. If you look at the book of Judges, the book that precedes the stories of King Saul, King David, and King Solomon, there was an awful lot of chaos. In fact, in Judges 21, we're told, in that time there was no king, and everyone did what he thought was right in his own eyes. The king's job is to provide order in the chaos. However, there are plenty of examples in the prophetic books of Torah where the role of the prophet is to speak truth to power even when it's not a very popular idea. And so, that is what I will do. I will say that it is wrong to have someone speak on behalf of the Jewish people or in front of the Jewish people who is a bigot. And AIPAC, much like the role of the king, must keep Israel's borders secure. We're both doing a very good job in our ancient and holy roles. It's been a long time since I was that little girl protesting the cafeteria rules. And while I admire her courage and integrity, I would say to her that the world is more complicated than an elementary school cafeteria. In the words of my chavruta, Dr. Rabbi Alan Sellis, I will be the loyal opposition of AIPAC. I am not leaving the tent. I have a luxury as an individual rabbi that AIPAC does not have as an agency. So, while I'm not fully able to embrace the mission of AIPAC, I am not able to demonize it either. And I'll remain in the bipartisan tent, uncomfortably hovering towards the leftmost flap of it. But it's important, and I don't want my relationship with AIPAC to end. What does this mean for a deeper understanding of Jewish values? Other than we now understand better what played out in the American Jewish community this week, how does this apply outside of the political arena? I think it's an opportunity for all of us to examine the ways in which we are myopic. We have to know where we're limited. We have to know where we're short-sighted, because each of us has critical decisions to make, political or otherwise, and knowing where we are myopic may help inform the decisions that we're making. So how will my story with AIPAC or the story of King Saul and the prophet Samuel inform your decisions? decisions? How will you use Jewish values, the examples from the Bible, the example of your rabbi, and the example of AIPAC to make the world a better place? Shabbat Shalom.